In this video, we will learn about the structure of the database by looking at the world database. You first need to launch the Apache web server and the MySQL database in the XAMPP control panel. Next, you need to launch your browser and type in localhost to be redirected to the dashboard. There will be a link on the right to access phpMyAdmin. You can also type that URL in directly. Notice that this is an application running in a web browser. On the left-hand side of our application, we see the databases that we have. The first four databases control the phpMyAdmin application. The test database comes with the application, and we are not necessarily using that. In the last video, we imported the world database using the Import tab. If I click the plus sign, I will see that I have three tables. So a database consists of tables. There is also a new command to create a new table. And if I expand those tables, I will see more information. I will see the columns in those tables and the indexes if there are any. We will be concerned with the column names for now. Notice in the city table, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and I also have the ability to create another one. In the country table, I have 15 columns. In the country language table, I have 4 columns. If I click on the table name, and I am clicking on the table name for the city table, it will show me all of the data in that table. Notice the column names. There is the ID, name, country code, district, and population. Notice that the column names are also listed here. The listing here does not follow as it is in the table. Just want to point that out. However, that really doesn't matter. A table in a database is similar to a table in an Excel spreadsheet or even in a Microsoft Word document. It can contain hundreds, if not tens of thousands of rows, and the data in every row is organized in some kind of meaning with respect to the columns. These columns are sometimes referred to as field names. However, I will be calling them columns. Notice that we have tools in every row to edit that data. Notice that we are looking at page 1. Notice that I can advance and go to the last one. Notice that there are 164 pages organized in 25 rows per page, which I can change. Notice that there are over 4,000 rows. Notice each row has an ID column heading, and they are just in numerical order. There is usually some type of identification to uniquely identify every row. The next column is name. That is the name of the city. Notice we have a country code, the district, and the population. Notice there are no commas in the population because commas would be a formatting. I would also like to point out that we have an SQL statement which we will learn next week. Select all from city. That is selecting all of the rows from the city table and displaying it. That is how this table data was displayed to us using an SQL statement. Notice that phpMyAdmin commonly places these tick marks around column names. That character is found on the upper left side of the keyboard. You really don't need them around given names such as column names or table names. I typically do not use them. Notice that when we clicked on the name of the city, the results opened in the Browse tab. Notice that there is a path telling us where we are. We are in the World Database. The table is city. If I click on the Structure tab, it will show me the structure of that table. Here I see the names of the columns. I see the type of data. I see the collation. I see other attributes that may have been or may not have been set. When you create a table, you need to create the names of the columns. You need to indicate the data type, which we will learn later. This is the collation we will be using. We will also be learning about null values and other different attributes that we can impose on the requirements for the data to be entered in that column. As I stated before, every row generally has a unique identifier. That is called a primary key, and you will see that next to the column name. Here the ID is a primary key. It is an integer type. The 11 means that it can accommodate 11 digits across, which is a very large number. Notice we also have the auto increment. That means that the next row that is added, we will automatically add the next number. You do not need a collation on a number. You do on characters. Our next column, which is name, is a character data type, and it can accommodate 35 characters. Our country code is a character data type, which can accommodate 3. Notice there is a gray key next to country code. That means that that is a foreign key. The country code is actually a primary key in another table. Because this same column exists in 2 tables, we can make a relationship between those tables. We will learn about that later. The district is a character data type, and it can accommodate 20 characters. Population is an integer, and it also can accommodate 11 digits. Notice that there is a no in the null column here. Null means it doesn't exist. So what we are saying is that these columns cannot be empty. There must be a value in these columns. So if someone was trying to enter another row, the database would require that this data be entered with this character type, with these limits, and with the null being enforced. I would also like to point out on the left-hand side, we have clicked on the city table. Notice that that whole area is gray. Therefore, the Structure tab is related to the city table. The program knows that. If I were to click on the SQL tab, again, they are basing this on the city table, which we have selected. This is where you would be entering your SQL queries in order to learn how to work with the database using the SQL language. This is a sample, and I will edit this. I stated earlier that phpMyAdmin puts in these tick marks around table names and column names. You don't need them, and they can be annoying. So I typically remove them, or I don't enter them when I enter my SQL statement. So here we have an example of an SQL statement, which we saw earlier. Select all from city. If I execute this query, it will show me all of the rows. This view is very similar to the browse view that we saw earlier. Now when I click on the country table, I automatically am back in the Browse tab, and it's showing me the rows with the data and the column names from the country table. Again, we have about 15 column names here. So we have a scroll bar to see them all. We can navigate through the rows. By default, it's showing us 25 at a time. We can change that. I have just gone to the end of this table, and there are 238 rows in this table. Notice our SQL statement. Select all from country. That is the country table. If we were to click on the Structure tab, we would see how the columns in this table were created and defined. Here we have the code, which is technically the country code, as the primary key. We have the name of the country, the continent, the region, and other columns here. We have the data type required for those columns. We have the collation. Notice most of these columns will not allow a null or empty value. However, some of them will. Finally, we have the country language table. And when I click on that table name, it opens it up in the Browse tab. I can navigate through my rows. You can see that there are 984 rows total. Here is our SQL statement. If I click on the Structure tab, I will see the structure of those columns. There are only 4 columns. We have the country code, the language, the is official, and the percentage. Here we have the data types. We are not allowing null values in any of these columns, therefore they all have to have a value. Notice that there are 2 primary keys. This is called a composite. Technically, there is 1 primary key, but it is based on those 2 columns. In the left-hand tab here in phpMyAdmin, that home takes you back to the original page where we started. You can refresh or reload the navigation panel, and there are a few other commands here.